gratitude. I choose love. I pray with faith. I express myself with authenticity. I believe in community. I am a daughter. I am a friend you can confide in. My best friend is my work. I am an author. I am a mental and emotional health practitioner with a degree of PGDIC, certified in psychotherapy, rational emotive behavior therapy, applied transactional analysis, and breathwork for emotional well-being. I served as a human resource leader, presently founder of Dineessha Emotional Healing Foundation, 29 plus years of professional experience. My greatest qualification is not only what I studied, it is what I have lived. Trauma deepened my compassion. Healing became my purpose. Welcome to Dineessha Emotional Healing Foundation. Well, she's too emotional. Don't take him serious. He always has a sad face. There is no room for emotions here. We have too much of work to do right now. Stop being so dramatic, Try to be practical. Don't be emotional always. Well, these are the statements most of us have either heard or, rather even perhaps, said to someone else at the same time. But what if I told you that, emotions, they're never the opposite of logic. In fact, every decision we make is influenced, by our emotions in one way or the other. So let's, understand emotions today, not only from psychological perspective, but also let's say from biological and most importantly from a human perspective. And of course, today at the end of the conversation, I'll introduce you to two fascinating concepts which I call as fascinating. For sure, one is vulnerability and the other one is a metacognition, which can in many ways change the way you understand yourself. So it's going to be more of a theory conversation today, but well, it's required to understand emotions. So let us go ahead. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who have been joining me for the first time, my name is Pinky Kansara and I'm the founder of Dineessha Emotional Healing Foundation, a non-profit initiative dedicated to creating awareness, education, prevention and also compassionate support around emotional well-being and mental health. Thank you so much for being here today, and yes, let us begin. What are emotions? First, let's clear one misconception. Being emotional does not mean crying all the time, losing control, becoming irrational or being overly sensitive. Emotions are simply, how do I put it across? It's a natural response to experiences, like every experience creates a feeling and every feeling influences a thought. Every thought influences a behavior, and repeated behaviors slowly become our personality, they become our habits, our relationships, and eventually they become our life. In fact, if they are information, they are the signals. They are like a data to us, The problem isn't about having emotions. The problem is when we don't understand them. A little from the biological perspective. Yes, I'll make it very simple. Inside our brain, there is an area called the limbic system. This is where many of our emotional responses, they originate from, emotions originate from. Let's say when something happens to us, or when somebody has, when somebody appreciates us, or in other way, let's say when somebody criticizes us, or we lose someone, or maybe we achieve something, our brain processes that experience emotionally before we consciously analyze it, and this happens like really fast, which is why most of the times we react before we even realize what we are feeling. And again, this is completely human. The goal is never to stop emotions. It is all about to understand them. Every emotion has a thought behind it. Well, here's something really fascinating. Just let's get into this. Research suggests that we experience, let's say, approximately 8 thoughts per minute, which is nearly almost, let's say, 480 thoughts every hour. Now around, let's say, 11,000 thoughts, every day, which I had calculated before, being here, the 11,000 thoughts every day. Now imagine this, every emotion usually has a corresponding thought to it. If I feel rejected, there is a likely thought saying I am not good enough. If I feel anxious, let's say perhaps the thought is something is bad going to happen to me. If I feel confident, the thought may be I can handle this. Thoughts and emotions constantly influence each other. This is exactly why emotional well-being isn't just about thinking positive. It is about becoming aware of the relationship that we have between our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions and behavior. Because in the end of the day, our thoughts, they direct us towards our beliefs direct us towards our emotions, and finally it is the behavior, the way we behave. We experience hundreds of emotions. Many people believe there are only a few handful of emotions. If you ask somebody, they'll say happy, sad, angry, scared. But emotional research suggests is, human beings experience around, let's say 2 to 250 or maybe 300 also, different emotional states, with many framework identifying about, let's say, 250 plus, kind of emotions. Now think about the, difference between them: disappointed, heartbroken, frustrated, annoyed, also let's say embarrassed, ashamed, guilty, hopeful, relieved, inspired. All of these feel different. The richer our emotional vocabularies, it becomes the better that we understand ourselves. We need to expand the way, we have, more, let there be more emotions in our dictionary. Because if everything becomes like, I'm fine or I am stressed, we miss out on what's actually happening inside us. It's so easy to say, okay, I'm fine. I am fine what? Let's define that. Or maybe I'm stressed. Perfect, agreed. Define that. You know what I mean? Since I always keep on talking about emotions, people very often they ask me this question, that Pinky, what do you really mean about emotional intelligence? Well, emotional intelligence, it's not a rocket science. It is but to begin with, it is not about suppressing your emotions at all. It is basically the ability where you recognize, where you understand, where you manage and where you express your emotions appropriately. It is that simple, but it doesn't happen that way, that simple. Both, of course, for our own and of others. We cannot only expect to understand our emotions, but not of others. It is an art to understand others also. It begins with one powerful, simple word: awareness. Because we cannot change what we don't notice. How will you know what has to be changed? It's like, let me give you an example. It's like driving a car without even looking at the dashboard. Eventually something will go wrong, because awareness is like your emotional dashboard. It tells you, what's happening before things become overwhelming. There are three layers to awareness. When you talk about awareness, basically there are three layers to it. There are three different layers rather. The first layer is, of course, knowledge. When we hear something, or maybe let's say when we read something, or maybe say, let's say we watch a a podcast or something on a YouTube. But knowledge alone does not transform us, because it only gives us that information. The second layer, which is called as a critical insight. Now we begin asking, questions. Does this make sense? Whatever knowledge you have, then you start questioning that. Does this make sense? How does this apply to my life? Can I challenge this idea? So, after that you process that. The third layer, that is called the embodied understanding. This is when knowledge actually becomes your behavior. This is where real transformation begins. Interestingly, the Eastern philosophy has been talking about this for centuries. It describes, three beautiful stages, if I could mention. One is, Shravan, that is supposed to be listening. Second one is supposed to be Manana, which is supposed to be reflecting and understanding. Third is Dhyana, deeply integrating and leaving with that wisdom. So it is basically knowledge, reflection and application. Because without application, any information remains only information. Which application, let's say with application, you can transform things, because you are applying things to that. So sometimes you see people have a lot of knowledge, because they have read too many books, so they are fantastic when it comes to knowledge, but when it comes to applying that knowledge and performance, they give a very a sorry face, because they have not been able to apply that, that could transform them. They have only kept it as a knowledge, so when they talk, we feel they know so much, but when it came to performance, they couldn't. Chaliye, now let's talk about one of my favorite subjects again, vulnerability, which is highly understood. When you say people are being vulnerable, many people think being vulnerable means weakness. No, it's basically, when you say vulnerability, it is allowing yourself to genuinely experience your emotions without wanting to immediately judge them. It is basically saying, I feel hurt, I feel afraid, I don't have all the answers, I need help. It's like that takes charge, not weakness. It's like when we allow ourselves to feel, we also allow ourselves to grow. Interestingly, vulnerability is closely linked with creativity. That is the reason, if you see the musicians, the designers, the artists, the actors, the innovators, they often create extraordinary work, because they allow themselves to experience life deeply. They are willing to explore emotions rather than avoiding them. They are in many ways, they are willing to think differently, to imagine differently, to create differently. So perhaps looking different isn't always a problem. The problem is we don't want to look different. We feel we don't want to be we want to be in the same crowd. We want to just fit into. But sometimes it is where this is exactly where innovation begins, when you start thinking differently. Now let's come to the last concept, which is which we call as metacognition. It simply means about thinking about your thinking. Now, how to explain? I'll make it a little more simple for you. Imagine let's say, like, you are watching a movie, or watching a play. Now metacognition allows you to step outside the movie for a moment. So that it's like becoming the observer. Instead of becoming every thought, you begin asking, what am I thinking right now? Is this the thought which is helping me? Is it based on facts, or is it just assumptions? This is where awareness becomes more powerful. So it's basically thinking about your thoughts. So what thoughts you are getting, you are trying to introspect those thoughts. That is called metacognition, where you are understanding, what am I thinking, and is that thinking making sense? And this is why I specialize into rational emotive behavior therapy, which is commonly known as REBT. Now REBT teaches us something very important. It isn't always the the event that creates emotional suffering. No, it is very often basically the belief we attach to that event. Let's say, I'll give you an example. Someone doesn't reply to your message. One belief will tell you, they must hate me. Another belief will tell you, they simply must be busy. Now same situation, different belief, different emotional outcome. What you'll believe, your emotional outcome will also be different. So when we begin questioning irrational beliefs, our emotional responses, in a way, they begin changing too. Let's say how we respond also will change according to the beliefs that we have. So not because of not because life becomes easier anyways, but because our thinking has become more healthier. So you cannot expect things to change and life to become easier. It is basically we being able to get our thought process from irrational to rational, and that's how you start becoming more emotionally healthier. So before we end today, I'll again leave you all with one exercise for this week. It's called the WOOP technique, WOOP. Now W stands for wish. What is one meaningful goal you genuinely want? W stands for wish. So it's basically, you know, what is one meaningful goal that you genuinely want. Let's say, for example, again, I want to become more confident. I usually do this practice with my, you know, clients which are one-to-one. So it's basically, you know, asking yourself, I want to become more confident during presentations. O, which is means outcome. What positive outcome would happen if this becomes true? Again, I would express my ideas confidently. I would feel calmer. I will, you know, I would, let's say, enjoy speaking more better. Then again, O stands for obstacle. Now let's say, now you have to look inward. What is the biggest internal obstacle which is coming in my way? Not the external one, internal. Let's say perhaps I keep telling myself I am not good enough, or I'm afraid people will judge me. Last one, the P, that is supposed to be the plan. Now create an implementation plan. If I notice myself becoming anxious before speaking, then I'll pause. You know, I'll take, like, let's say 3 slow breaths. You know, I'll try to remind myself that I don't need to be perfect and begin with confidence. This, you know, the small exercise trains your brain to move, let's say, from you know, from emotional reaction towards, you know, an intentional action basically. So from emotional reaction you move towards an intentional action. So we end here, and I would like to, you know, for you to only today remember just one thing: emotions are not your enemy, they are your messengers. Don't silence them, you know, don't fear them, rather become more, you know, curious about them, because awareness creates understanding. Again, understanding will create healthier choices, and when you have healthier choices, it will actually gradually, you know, transform our lives altogether. So thank you so very much for spending these you know, moments out here with me. And in case if this conversation, you know, resonates with you, I would love for you to share it with somebody who really needs to, you know, get this for themselves today. And I'd also like you to answer one question in the comment box, please. What emotion have you been finding, you know, let's say, most difficult to understand lately? So I would, you know, genuinely love to hear from you. And until next time, take care of yourself, and of course, you know, be kind to yourself. So thank you everybody, and see you in the next conversation. And this time in the coming conversation, we are moving beyond theory now. In fact, you know, we'll be exploring one of the most desired and powerful human emotions. You know, rather it's an emotion in many ways. You know, it's also become my identity. So I think you can guess that which emotion that is, right? And if you have, you know, if you can guess it right, please put them in the comment box. Again, I would love to know that, and let's see who gets it right. So until then, next time, take care of yourself once again. Lots of love. Bye bye.